So before this quick break, we had lens number one, which was how does it look like from an outside perspective? And I presented you with this model based on quite a lot of experience of how it looks like when you are looking at how corporates change. And then I had this very finger-wagging warning about not falling into the trap of blaming the bosses, just maybe because you don't have a hands-on experience of how to run a large company. But also reminding you that although the world looks like it's going to transform like this, doesn't mean that that's the ideal way of transforming. Good. Lens number two, top management perspective. And I'm going to continue my very practical, not so theoretical approach today. And this again is from my stint at Bearing Point and the fabulous people at Bearing Point, and banging our heads together of thinking at, okay, if this is the maturity model and this is how it seems to go, what is perhaps the ideal way that a top manager should execute the transformation? So a roadmap, top level roadmap for a new company culture. I'm going to have a link for this, or Oona's going to put it on the blog page, so you can actually read further and download this fantastic infograph and put it on your wall. What are the 6 foundation stones of cultural transformation? So again, this is one way of looking at it. This is a lot of experience put together into these 6 steps, and at least they should provoke your thoughts. Number one, first step, that if you are a top executive, you are the chief digital officer or even the CEO, are you ready to change? Is the executive ready to change? And do they want to change? And what does it mean? A couple of things that pop up are, first of all, if you want to change into this new company culture, what is your attitude towards learning? What is your attitude towards experiments? Are they an investment or are they a cost? And then experiment, next step, risk-taking, failure. What is your attitudes towards them? Do you see risk-taking as an important part of changing a company culture? And if you accept that, what is your attitude towards failure? Do you accept failure? Because these things go hand in hand. What about this thing that you actually need to start delegating stuff? Give away decision-making power. Are you ready for that? What does it mean in practice? Are you happy for other people to make those big decisions? Are you ready to overhaul the way that you budget and invest the company resources and money? Because that will change if you start doing things in a different way. And last but not least, how will you personally embrace all of these great things that come with the new culture? Customer centricity, experimentation, agility, failing fast, and so forth and so forth. Sometimes when I talk about these things, it kind of sounds like, aren't these obvious? Isn't this pretty obvious that this is how things should go? And maybe this is part of the source of the kind of the tension between the big bosses in suits and the, progressive revolutionaries, because this is not obvious. No, I've been personally witnessing a lot of top executives saying that we need company change, but I'm not going to change. I really like those exotic animals that run around in our company, but still there is this fence between me and them. I'm not going to be an exotic animal. Let them be an exotic animal. Maybe the company transformation becomes a little bit harder then. Okay. Step one, let's accept that, yes, we got a new CDO and that person is just amazing and that person embraces everything our new culture is all about. So next step, yes, we need a strategy and we need a vision. There are more people than one in this corporation and they need to know where we are going. So this is kind of copy-pasting what a strategy school book says, but somehow, again, people seem to forget these basics when they are running a corporation. For example, a good strategy, How is our industry changing? Who is changing it? Are we changing it or are we following? What about our customers? Where are they going? How are they going to change? What's our unique competencies in this? What are we really good at? What's our unique advantages? Are we shaping a market or are we adapting to the market? How are we as an organization going to do? And this last point is what will you actually do, we as a company, and what we won't do. So I don't know about you, but I've seen a couple of digital strategies where you just pour everything. We're going to do all of this stuff. And a smart person is going to go like, no, we're not going to do all of this stuff. So what are we going to leave out? So, a good strategy perhaps is something that says that we're not going to do this. An example. So I worked quite a lot with Wärtsilä, and I'm happy to see that there are a couple of Wärtsilä people here listening as well, I guess. I think what they did was exactly a good thing. They started building this vision, what they call a smart marine ecosystem. They made this vision and kind of strategy. This is where we want to go. And it is so very powerful. Now people can refer to it, people can read it, people can look into it, they can take their own individual jobs and they can kind of reflect, what is my job, how I'm going, all this. So it's in kind of all simplicity. This is what it is all about. So we have the leaders who embrace all this. We have a strategy, we have a vision to follow, so we can actually scale this to the whole company. What about the scaffolding? So once we start doing this, how does the scaffolding support us in this change? So what are the supportive structures? So for example, decision-making principles. How are we going to tell people that how do they make decisions? Are there certain principles to follow? How do they report? What are the reporting models? What kind of other organization structures are we going to build? How do we measure success? What does success mean in our company and our company culture? And then one of my favorite stuff, governance models, portfolios, where the rubber meets the road, where governance models are almost by definition the way what we govern the people in our company. Are they going to change or are they be the same? These are the scaffoldings of the culture. And then, of course, literally, what are the critical ways of working, tools, operating models, all of this stuff that where really when people do work, what are the tools they're going to use? It's going to shape the way that they're going to behave and the culture as well. As a quick example, this is my former employer, Futurize, where there was this decision-making model, literally simple as this. So everybody could make decisions based on how will this decision affect our own people, our employees, how it will affect our customers, how it will affect our business numbers, and how will it affect now and how it will affect in the future. So this model was as simple as it is, and people could make decisions based on it and start discussing about it. So just an example of a simple decision-making model. And you can see here between the lines what kind of a culture this is implying. So after the scaffolding, the supportive structures, we need to look at the capabilities, competencies. What can we actually do? Our people's skills, our systems, and all of that make up our capabilities. Speaking of systems, a lot of established companies have legacy systems. So which ones are we going to keep and which ones we're going to renew? Then the other big thing about capabilities is people's skills. So what's our strategy for recruitment? Are we going to have new skills? And what are the new skills we're going to have? How are we going to fight for this talent that everybody else wants? Or maybe we don't recruit that many people. Let's look at our current workforce. So what is our strategy? How do we, what are we going to do with trainings and education? How are we going to transform our existing employees for this new culture? And just basic question, how mature, for example, is our design competence, development competence, DevOps, kind of the basic stuff, especially in the more and more digital world that we have. Where are we at? I guess I could, the next question again, we could add AI, data science, machine learning. What are are these relevant for us? And what are our capabilities and competencies with these at the moment? So again, kind of stuff that probably doesn't surprise you, but giving a framework of what are the questions to ask if you're the executive or you are working with the executive. Then, how do we start? Where do we start? What's the very first step? We have now top leaders embracing it, strategy and a vision. We have the scaffolding in place. We have thought about the competencies and capabilities. So what's our first step? In other words, what are our spearheads, pilots? What kind of ambassadors, if you will, we're going to create for this change? Again, remember the context of company change. So to break this down, goes into what we're going to talk in next week is agile processes, Scrum, maybe SAFe as a framework. What about our design work, lean startup, all of these philosophies? What are we going to do with these? Do our people know about them, and what should they know about it? And when we start these pilots or spearhead projects, are they strategically important? Or are we going to give some not that important project? Which one are you going to use? If it's very important, then there's of course a risk that if everything fails, people are going to go like, yeah, this new culture doesn't work for us. But if it succeeds, then people are like, wow, we here in our organization can actually create all of this stuff with this new culture. And typically what happens, and then maybe many of you have worked in these, that you kind of then create these innovation hubs or labs where people can, kind of like this greenhouse where they have special conditions working, they can already build the new culture from scratch. So you take an innovation hub and you literally do the new company culture from scratch. And then there's the rest of the company. And then you somehow kind of migrate people and lessons learned between these two. And so forth. And last point there is how do you actually communicate when you start doing spearheads and pilots, and how do you communicate these further? An example of this here in Finland, of course, is Slush. Slush, where, I don't know how many of you have been there in the past decade, but what has happened is that it's been kind of, could I say, hijacked by corporations. So it is a startup event, but all the corporations are there to show that, yes, we have these new ways of working. We have this new culture. We have these spearheads. We have these new products coming out that have been done in this new way of doing. And that is fine. That is perfectly good. And then the last step. You did the spearheads. You had the pilots. You created a group of ambassadors who are going to spread the word. Then how do we actually scale up? So if that was, let's say, 200 people, but we're 20,000 people. How do you grow? So of course the question is then, how will we communicate the results? How do we communicate to everybody? Why are we doing all this? That's where the strategy and the vision come in. How do we gather learnings? So if we do a spearhead, how do we gather the learnings that how did it actually work in our current culture? Because that's going to help us to transform it into the new culture. Have we made sure that the board member, the very top of our organization, understands what we're doing and they're on board? No pun intended. And then, of course, have you created the goals, metrics, success criteria for this change? Have you eaten your own dog food? If you're running a project of a transformation, have you put down good metrics for it? Do you know why you are doing it? Do you have your goal clear and all that? And my example here is, for example, YLE is running these, and I'm going to come back to this later in this course, is running these open public events about culture change. And they're scaling up in that way as well. They're literally scaling it outside their organization, telling that how we are doing it, bringing people in, experts, and not just having them talk to people inside, but making them public so anybody can listen to all of this. So that's one way of doing it, extremely open way of doing it. the scaling up. So that's ideal. And those 6 steps have a lot of thinking behind them and experience, and probably good questions, a good checklist for anybody running a top, from the top level running the transformation. But experience has shown that we have a couple of roadblocks. Things don't go as smoothly as you would like to. Here's my top, I guess I have 4. Top 4 roadblocks. Roadshow for roadblocks. Remember, it was a road metaphor, and now you have roadblocks. I do plan these things. So first of all is the governance and the PMO. So most probably the thing that is gonna hit you, well, I don't have to be too dramatic, but the thing that you're gonna struggle with is the governance models. And if you don't change these, if these are not on the culture change agenda, then these are gonna inhibit the change. So you can tell people, you can convince people, you can train people, you can educate people, but at the end of the day, you still have the old governance models. They cannot work in the new way. Same goes with valuation models, meaning that, abstractly speaking, what is valued in our company, but also, how do we evaluate things? For example, new innovations. What is the model that we actually calculate? The ROE of an invention or innovation. So that kind of valuation models. And decision making anyway. Who makes these decisions? How are they made? How often are they made? And then budgeting. Typically, if you're a large company, to put it bluntly, what you do, you have budgeting cycles. Maybe you have it once a year. It is, let's say, in November. In November, the whole company sits down and budgets the next year. And then we're done. And then we do the budgeting again next November. Now, try to be very agile and, experimental in that setting. Doesn't really happen. And then, of course, it goes into actual principles of budgeting. How do we, do we give money because to cover costs, or are we giving money as an investment? If you have trainings for people, are they investment or are they costs? That's kind of principles of budgeting. And portfolio management. Let's see if I have going to come back to that later on this course. Kind of my favorite topics because it's extremely boring for a lot of people, but very powerful if you want to change. Then I'm sure this one everybody can relate to. Now, if you want a new company culture, and if you want to transform a culture, you need to have people talking. You need to have people sharing their views. You need to have people creating those meanings. So when people get together, first of all, can they get together? Do they bump into each other occasionally? Is it proper work? If I sit down and talk an hour with somebody about their work and my work, and we share our views, is that proper work? Where do I put the hours? Do you have a project? Where should I put this? The other word is these unproductive encounters. And we all know that if we, sometimes it's like, it's fantastic. I actually, I sat down and talked with Jari, which is, kind of what happened is that, Jari and me found ourselves, well, we knew a little bit before. We found ourselves working at the same department. It's like, hey, nobody told us to do this course together. It was kind of like, yeah, we should probably do this course together. And then the fourth roadblock goes into individual people's career models. So if you want to change a company culture, but this is kind of very related to the governance. If the career models, the way that we in the company are individually valued, our goals and kind of, whatever point systems you have, if that doesn't support constant learning, experimentation, failures, of course the culture changes. The transformation is not going to happen. Very much a scaffolding thing here. That's why the guy is kind of hanging onto the scaffolding. See, I do have a point here with these images. Good. Okay, my main point. From the top perspective, if you are there on the top of the corporation, the whole cultural transformation is extremely holistic. And this goes back to my rant about those red buttons against the black button. Remember that? So if the red button people, the red people think that it's just, why don't we do it like we did this lean project? Well, no, it's much more holistic. It includes, among other things, strategies, capabilities, innovations, organization structures, governance, and of course the executives themselves. So to put it very bluntly, it is big. And if you remember that all of these philosophies that we find very popular and which are great, agile development, lean startup, design thinking, they did not come from the boardroom. They did not come from a world where it is obvious that cultural change is very holistic. So there's a little bit of tension there. It's not just an agile and a lean project to change a culture. Again, if you're a change leader, change agent, facilitator, you should be probably quite aware of these things and also have the capabilities of having different lenses of what does it look like from the top executive's perspective, for example. Good. I'm slightly conscious if I'm talking too fast because I have now 3 minutes to go. But maybe I just take a couple of deep breaths and let you have a breather as well. Then my last lens, kind of related to the top executives, but more of a leadership lens. Now that I actually realized, hey, it's good I have a couple of minutes, because I realized I don't have the grassroots. Yeah, I actually changed this in the last minute because I wanted to do this. So my third lens is, what does it look from a leadership perspective? And now I'm not talking about top executives. I'm talking about anybody who needs to lead other people in an organization. So if you're a boss, in other words, you have people working under you, then obviously you are a leader. You're leading these people somewhere. But you can be kind of a thought leader as well. You can be such a good worker that other people actually follow you. Or maybe you have been 20 years in the company. So people really follow you. What do you do? Because you're like a fish in the water in that sense. So there's a leadership aspect as well. Or my last point being that if you are a change agent or a change leader, then definitely you also have one way of leading. You have a leadership status as well. So again, if you have come to this course, you most probably, again, everything here sounds very familiar. So let's bring everybody on the same page. And then maybe I should add, last but not least, there's of course these kind of public discussions about leadership. You know, newspaper discussions. What does leadership mean nowadays? And all of these things. So it's a very loaded word in a good way as well. Well, in this new culture, in this transformation, it becomes obvious leadership does not happen from a distance. So it's not like this control room in this picture where the leader is just behind this desk and gets all these reports and numbers and never meets anybody. And maybe that's the old way of thinking or management principles. It's just, you know, it is this dream that I had all the relevant metrics here and I could lead this corporation just by moving this and turning that knob a little bit here on the left. But of course, it doesn't happen like that, especially if you want to transform the company or the company culture. So what you need is to get dirty. And this goes back to what I talked about, the top executives' desire for change. Are they ready to make mistakes themselves? Everybody understands the fact that if the top brass says that, hey, by the way, it's now perfectly fine for you to make mistakes in our company, then everybody's like, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see, whoever makes the first mistake, they, you know, do they give them champagne or do they fire them? And of course, it makes, you know, if you're really behind this, then it means that you as a leader, even if you're a leader of a team, leader of a department, you need to start making literally mistakes so other people actually believe you. So it means that try out things, do things differently, talk about it, get dirty, just like this. I like this image, this rugby image, because as a leader, you might be the referee over there. You're not this, it doesn't mean you have to go and do other people's work. But that referee is getting dirty. That referee is there where the players are. And then, of course, it's clearing for others to proceed. So this is, of course, this is what it's a lot about leadership talk nowadays, is that leadership is more leader as a servant. Leader as a person saying that, okay, I'm not the expert. I hired you because you're the expert. So my job is now to have your expertise actually make a positive impact. So what I'm going to do is clean the desks and clean all the problems and help you succeed because you're an investment in this company. So that kind of leadership. And then I think an important part of why, to put it bluntly, sometimes you hear that we don't need leaders anymore. We're autonomous. We don't need any bosses in this organization. We're smart people. We can take care of ourselves. Well, that's totally false, in my opinion. First of all, you need leaders because they have a job. They are the ones who see all those autonomous teams. They listen to them. And they're the ones who are responsible for those strategic goals. Maybe they are responsible for who our customers are. Maybe they're responsible for getting all the customer knowledge into one place and then letting all those autonomous teams use it for whatever purposes. Leaders are needed to, make the decisions or facilitate what is actually valued in our company. What do we think in this culture as valuable? How does it relate to our strategy and so forth? And of course, that's an enormously important job. So be wary if anybody says that we don't need any bosses or leaders. Because the way to do this, of course, and we're going to talk a lot about this with Jari in the later lectures, is that this is where all the listening, talking, updating, this is where it all comes in as a leadership. So you're actually listening to those people because you believe that those are the experts. But you're the one who's bringing all those views together and giving that view kind of a direction. So here I put this gardening image. So one way to think about it is that you are the gardener. The people in the company are the plants, and the plants are the ones that bear the fruit, literally, that do what the company does. But you are more the gardener, making sure that the environment is right, the culture is perfect, right humidity, right minerals, picking up dead leaves, whatever that metaphor means. So your point is that you are the gardener. You are telling people where we are collectively going and why. And that's, of course, what if you're the top executive, that's what you're telling the board as well. Where are we going and why? Okay, that was my rant about leadership. And if that was a little bit superficial or obvious, I'm definitely going to go deeper. And what I'm going to use is Wenger's communities and practice and kind of that thinking over there where we have the participation, reification process of meanings. I'm going to get back into the shared meanings and how much cultural change and leadership is about curating these meanings or curating this whole process. But we're going to, actually, that's why the reason I changed. Next week, we're going to dive deeper into this. So get really theoretical in this sense. Good. My main point about leadership in transformation is that leading this change, even, whatever level leader you are, or even if you're not a formal leader, but people seem to follow you for some strange reason, you understand it requires social interaction, talking, listening, understanding people. You need to encourage creativity and risk-taking. It doesn't happen just by saying that this is now allowed. And then what I said, the word curating and shared meanings, which in other words is just making sure that everybody has the same idea of what is valuable in our company. By the way, I like the word valuable much more than value, which is a very fashionable word. Let's create value. Our purpose is to create value. We're not creating money, we're creating value. Yeah, okay. I like more the word valuable because it kind of has better connotations. Or to put it bluntly, like I have there in the parentheses, what this means as a leader is infinite listening and dialogue, but also making decisions when needed. You're not a passive leader who just listens and writes down what people say and brings together. You make decisions because that's what you're paid for. So now I'm going to break you into rooms. Very simple question, and I'm sure you have a lot of different views, experience, and everything. What do you think that makes this kind of leadership easy? What makes it difficult? So now read those slides while I try to do the breakout room magic. There we go. Oops. I'm going to assign you into 50 rooms automatically. Create rooms. Good. I'm going to give you 14 minutes. I'm going to allow you to return back for whatever reason. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds before I'm going to transfer you. Okay, everybody ready? Hey, Eric. Eric, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Here we go.
Hi.
And Those of you who might have joined in the middle. Everybody else is in a breakout room. But we have still 1 minute to go. And we're going to break back here. Ten seconds. Hey, welcome back. And we close the rooms now. Oops, no, that gave them more 30 seconds more. Hey, I can see familiar people. Hey, Thea. Täällä on siellä muitakin. Vähän aikaa mä mietin, kuka droidi olikaan, mutta sitten mä aloin tunnistaa tuolta mysteerisestä taustasta tuttuja kasvoja. No nyt. Everybody should be back. Am I right?
You.
Yes.
Nice umbrella, Mika.
Honey is back. Nice to see you, honey. And some new people. Okay. I hope you can remember to put something in the chat as well, because yes, we actually read them afterwards and we're going to store them and all that. Helps us to understand what happens. I'm looking at some of the answers now. Keeping the big picture in mind, recognizing the own lens, easy when there's a vision. The direction of the company is missing. I think that was there. Again, maybe I kind of said this, but during my 8 years of being involved in the kind of activities I talked about today, again, I kind of thought, I had this feeling that all of these feel so simple. I mean, when somebody wrote there that this is a very difficult way of leadership when the company direction is unclear. It's kind of like, yeah, isn't that obvious? But nevertheless, at least to me, is that it's not that obvious. Or maybe it is obvious when somebody says it, but actually doing something about it is anything but obvious. And people tend to be kind of paralyzed in situations like that. It's like, I'm not going to do anything because we don't have. And then they're going to wait until the company, direction and strategy and vision is clear before they do anything. And those are the situations to start thinking up, okay, that is your choice. Why did you do that choice? And so forth. Yes, facilitation and all that comes back in. Well, let's wrap it up for today. So I'm going to now introduce the second exercise. So if we had the onion last week, I call this the temporal onion. So what I mean by this is, all simplicity is temporal. By him, I just mean time. So if you look at the onion, it was static. It didn't have any time dimension. So now let's bring in a time dimension. And then again, let's use that exercise to dig out something interesting. So before, during, after, that's temporal context. And remember, the point of this is really about that, the fact that success is always defined from the bubble outside your own. So if you're a team, then the success of your team is defined by somebody outside your team. And, it goes out and out and out. And the whole company's success is kind of, you can think, defined by the market. So that's kind of a very strong and simple principle to keep in mind. And like I said, the problem with the onion, or I'm not saying a problem, because the onion was a simplicity, so it doesn't answer you everything. But one of the things it doesn't answer you is the time dimension. It does not imply change. And that's why I had this little talk in the beginning about, okay, for the onion to work, you need to be understanding what's the change we're actually driving. No. And now we talk a lot about company transformations, and typically that's kind of the change that you might find yourself in. So how do you draw the onion on a timeline? It starts like this. So if you are there in the onion, your project is there, the inner workings of it, or maybe you're in the middle. Like I said, the thing before your project starts, or wherever you start, it comes from somewhere. And after that, it has an impact somewhere. And of course, if you think it like a project, there's stuff that has happened before your project starts. And typically they come from the context. And once your project is done, that's when the impact starts. So hardly ever actually the impact happens during your project. Of course it can, and in some cases it does, but just as a thinking way of doing it, the impact happens outside your project. So just to put it very bluntly, whatever you're doing, let's call it a project, never happens, of course, in a vacuum. It comes from somewhere. It has an impact somewhere outside your project. If it's a good project and it has an impact, then the impact will actually remain and work afterwards. Which means that if you think about, is my project successful? Did it achieve what we wanted? You could think that it actually happened somewhere there, somewhere outside. When the project has closed, everybody has packed their stuff and moved on to the next project. So what I'm implying is that a good project is something that people can go that, yeah, remember last year we had this thing, this workshop run by J.P. Erkkola, nice to see you. And it actually had a huge impact, and we can now see that it was really successful. So I'm going to draw this again very simply. So how do you plan your individual project, whether it's a small, large project? How do you plan it into the larger context that the onion helps you to figure out? So this is typically where any project we're doing, there's a beginning and there's an end. In the beginning, we have some kind of a context where we start, and in the end, we somehow kind of a definition of done. Now, to provoke you a little bit, I'm going to say that this is very much navel gazing. This is looking things at too small scale. That you're not really on, if you just look your project from beginning to an end, you're not looking at the big picture, literally. And it's also very selfish. You're just caring about your project, the people in the project. You're not thinking about all the other projects, all the other people in your organization that are taking, hopefully, the company further as well. So, in all simplicity, this is pretty much the exercise I'm going to ask you to do, is imagine yourself with your pair, now just asking them that, can you describe, here's the project, you just described me. So let's go into the future. So tell me that what do you hope that has happened 1 year after your project was finished? So that people can say in hindsight that, hey, that was a fantastic project. In other words, what's actually the desired impact of your project 1 year into the future? Very simple question. Okay, then let's start rolling back. And what about 6 months after the project ended? What would be ideal that has happened 6 months after your project stopped? What about 1 month? And then when the project ends, what do we need to have here? When the project ends, what do we need to have so that we actually get that impact after 1 month and after 6 months and all that? And then we go into the past as well, figuring out what's the history. Where do we come from? What has happened before this project even started that is relevant about it? And then, of course, before the project starts, what needs to be ready before we start? And now you can see that if you're doing project planning, You actually, of course, you plan the white box, the actual project, but your planning extends much, much further and also takes into account the history as well. So you actually take the context, the bigger picture, literally. This is, of course, obvious. This is what you should actually do, but this is really to remind you. And again, as a facilitator, as a change agent, or whatever you call yourself, you probably find yourself asking these questions from your client, from your peer, from your colleague, or whatever, to help them figure out how do you make that project actually have the desired impact. So it's as simple as this, just to remind you. And now, doing it like this, we plan our work in the larger context. What's the impact we desire? What is actually the larger change that this one project is part of? And that's the exercise I'm going to ask you to do. You get a pair and ask them those questions. Make them answer it. Sounds childish? Obvious? Hey, Risto, that's not academic. That's common sense, and I knew most of it anyway. Yeah. Funny old world, isn't it? But you have to remember, now the lesson here for me is that this is a tool, just like the onion was last week. Don't focus too much on the tool. The tool is not the superstar here. It's only a tool. So it's only a thing that starts conversation. It's only a tool to figure out that when the other person starts explaining those things, when the other person starts describing the context, keep your eyes and ears open. That what is hard, what is easy, what is complex, what is unclear, and what might be actually the root causes. And this goes for the onion, and this goes for the tool this week. Yes, they're extremely simple, even childish if you want. But the point is not the tool. The point is that if you give somebody that, if you push them through this very simple tool, start paying attention to the process. What do they answer? Not the context, not the actual content, what they answer. That's important. But also, is it difficult for them to answer? Is it complex? So I really liked, for example, last week when people gave the feedback and the reflection that this is too simple. That's very interesting. Why do you want it to be more complex? And stuff like that. And that's, of course, what facilitation is all about. You, of course, help them to get clear answers, but you're also at the same time very much tuning on the pulse that what is difficult and what is easy for them and why. Why is this seems to be very easy? Why it seems that it's really difficult for them to actually clarify the desired impact from 1 year from now. So here's the exercise. You're going to get the slides again. You get a pair. What is their current project? It can be same they used for the onion, obviously. Draw before, during, after, just like I had a couple slides ago, and ask all the questions. Switch roles. And then when you do, remember, interview people, draw pictures. Draw them on a computer, on piece of paper, whatever. And make sure you understand what you're drawing. So that's the whole point. The other person needs to explain it so well that when you draw the picture for their project, you understand what you're drawing. Because that's the only way that they are actually telling you the information that is relevant. And then again, get together, talk a little bit, at least 5 minutes, or at least reflect 5 minutes in silence. And what did you learn about the whole process, the tool and everything, and then discuss together. Hey, I thought about this. For me, this was really surprising. Well, me, this was. And then submit everything again to our email address, which, by the way, now should accept many more addresses because it was bouncing some of the addresses. Apologies for that as well. The world isn't perfect yet. Good. Last slide. I actually have 2 readings for you. I'm going to maybe dig up a little bit more about this topic. The first one is really the roadmap I talked about, so you can go and check it out and download it as a PDF. And then I put 1 digital transformation academic article for you to enjoy as well. So looking more of the academic part of these transformations.